a realistic estimate?
On May 22nd, 2023, I received a phone call that my son was being medevaced to a trauma hospital, and they didn't know if he was going to make it. I couldn't breathe. He flipped his truck and suffered a severe brain injury and was unresponsive. He spent the next 3 weeks in the hospital and nearly died 3 more times. I spent 24/7 next to his bed and helped any way that I could. When the bed needed changing, I helped the nurses. Mothering my son brought me great joy, even if I wasn't sure he was going to make it. I watched the ventilator breathe for him and wondered what that felt like. The first time he woke up, he still had the breathing tube in. The neurosurgery resident asked him to give him a thumbs up to let him know he was awake, and he flipped him off. The neurosurgery attending said, "Yep, looks like your son is back." I think that was the first breath I remember taking since that phone call. Anyone that has gone through that level of life-altering trauma can tell you the experience is filled with the lowest lows and the highest highs. It brings a full spectrum human experience to life. That day, Lucas was transferred to another unit to begin his long road to recovery. He was up out of bed. He was taking steps. He was smiling at me and telling me that he loved me. He was laughing at the jokes the physical therapist was making. I took a deep breath of gratitude. It was the highest high. Right now, how are you all breathing? Let's take a deep breath in and out. Every day, we take 25,800 breaths. I watch how consciousness moves in and out of the body from the first breath of life to the last breath when we die. And assuming that we live 72 years, we live 25,800 days. We have the same number of breaths in a day as we have days in a life. In the morning, we breathe the day in, and at night, when we fall to sleep, we breathe out the day. Breath changes consciousness. Through breath we live, and through breath we die. That night, in Lucas's room, I found him face down in a pool of his own blood. He was having a nosebleed. I called for help, and as a doctor, I did everything I could do to keep the blood out of his airway, to help him breathe, and as a mother, to keep him calm. I kept calling for help, but the nurse didn't do anything. She was frozen. My own breath was paralyzed, and yet all I could think about was trying to help my son breathe. I reached out to his father, who's an ENT surgeon, over the phone, and he helped keep our son alive. I kept asking for help, begging for help. At one point, the nurse came back into the room saying, "No one's coming. It's just us." Ultimately, Lucas lost 1/3 of his blood volume and had a stroke. The ICU team came and brought him back to life over the next 5 hours. Lucas was put back in a coma and back on a ventilator. Right now, who's holding their breath? We all hold our breath when we have too much to process. We hold our breath when we're stressed and overwhelmed. Like the 15-second real culture of life, we all hold our breath, waiting for a moment to exhale so that we can process all that we've taken in. In a normal breath, we inhale smoothly and then we let the breath out. Our chest rises and falls easily, effortlessly. When we're under stress, we have a very sharp breath. Our chest rises minimally, our jaw is tight. We breathe at the top of our breath, and then we exhale a little bit before we take in another breath. Our breaths are stacked. And then at some point, we take a deep breath, let it out, and change our state of mind. Breath holding is physically uncomfortable, and yet most of us are unaware to the discomfort in our chest. Through breath, we can detox. When we take a breath, our diaphragm moves and massages our lymphatic system to move out metabolic waste. When we hold our breath, our diaphragm is rigid and lymph and toxins back up. Emotionally, when we hold our breath, we don't breathe through the stressors. Instead, we hold on to them. When we breathe at the top of our breath, carbon dioxide accumulates and it further agitates our nervous system, driving anxiety further into the body. We hold our breath when we're doom scrolling, trying to fight off the sedation of the screen. In fact, we use screens in the operating room before surgery instead of what we used to use, a strong benzodiazepine called Versed. We actually call screens digital Versed. We use screens to self-sedate, to check out, kind of like a coma, but instead of feeling rested and rejuvenated, we're left feeling anxious and exhausted. When we finally put the screen down, we take a deep breath, come back to the present moment, but we're left wired and tired. Changing consciousness doesn't happen by accident. We reach a level of sedation which triggers a sigh, or we become an active participant. Either way, our breath changes, whether we're aware of it or not. There isn't some magic reset button in our brain that changes us from one state of consciousness to the other. It happens through the breath. It is always this way. It happened every time Lucas came back to us. He breathed into a new way of being. It happens with any mind-altering substance, including anesthetic. When we reach a new level of consciousness, we take a deep breath. And surgical nurses can verify this. They can tell you the moment before a patient wakes up, because they always take a deep breath. Consciousness is my medium. I have board certifications in anesthesiology, pediatric anesthesia, integrative medicine, and anthroposophic medicine. All that I understand about human development and relationship is through the lens of consciousness. Consciousness shines like light through the body, like a kaleidoscope that colors our perception of the world. We literally project on the outside world what is happening within us internally. And in order to change that perspective, consciousness has to breathe through the body and be modified by the breath. Breath changes consciousness, and consciousness is affected by the body it goes through. So things like anxiety, trauma, sensory overwhelm make this process much more difficult. Ongoing research shows that if you have unmanaged anxiety before your operation, you will have something similar to this image I'm going to paint for you. You're wheeled into the operating room. You're understandably very nervous. Your attention is outside of your body. It's everywhere looking for a possible threat. You are asleep to what's happening inside your body. You're holding your breath. Your jaw is tight. Your hands are cold. In fact, you may have had difficulty with an IV placement before you started because anxiety makes your hands cold. So you're on the operating room table getting ready to go to sleep. And we as anesthesiologists may have to give you up to a complete dose of anesthesia just to get you ready to start to fall asleep. And then we give you your regular dose of anesthesia so you can fall fully asleep and it's safe for your surgery. So if you hear what I said that anxiety increases the amount of anesthesia you're going to need to fall asleep, with all the risks and side effects associated with that. And kids aren't immune to the stresses of today's world. 1 in 8 children has been diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. But what I see in my operating room, and my colleagues can verify, is that almost every single child today having anesthesia needs more to fall asleep. Anxiety affects surgical outcome. We know from studies that if you have anxiety before surgery, you're more likely to have nausea, pain afterwards. You're more likely to have a wound infection, delayed healing, and the most important thing is that anxiety before your surgery delays the time it takes to get you back to the life that you love. Also, if you have anxiety, it makes the transition from awake to asleep to awake more choppy, more turbulent, which means there's more risk of lung, brain, and heart complications during your procedure. Take a breath. Lucas was transferred back to that same unit to restart his recovery. When I walked up to that hallway, I froze. My breath was stuck in my throat. I was going over the images of Lucas not being able to breathe. In that moment, I consciously took hold of my breath to be able to change me from a state of PTSD to being able to take that first step down the hallway to be with my son. That was the start of my deep journey with breathwork, to change consciousness, to relieve anxiety, and to be there for myself and my son. I became a yoga teacher, and I used the pain of that experience to create an online course to help other patients manage their anxiety before their surgery. We can wake up to our breath and use breath as medicine to digest our world. We can use breath to create space to process all that we accumulate. And if we fully exhale, we can allow the death of one thing to create space for the birth of something else. Here's my call to action. Work with your breath. I'm going to go over a quick breathwork technique right now called box breathing. Okay, do this with me. We're going to inhale for a count of 4. Hold at the top for a count of 4. Exhale for a count of 4. And hold at the bottom for a count of 4. That's 1 round of box breathing. Do 10 rounds in the morning and 10 rounds at night. Ways you can support your breathwork practice. Find rhythm in your daily life. Find rhythm in your sleeping, your eating, and most importantly, in your light exposure. Expose yourself to different wavelengths of the sun throughout the day. When the body knows what awake is, the body can know what asleep is. Another way to support your breathwork practice is to move your body. Animals, when they experience anxiety, they shake it off. And as humans, when we move our body, we can relieve the anxiety that's built up in our subconscious area, in our animalic nature. So move your body to support your breathwork practice. My sincere hope for you is that you can find your way back into your body using your breath to relieve your anxiety and to wake up to your life. When you wake up to your life, you realize that relationship is where life happens, where you can drop into the present moment and experience joy, meaning, and purpose. When Lucas woke up the first time in the ICU, we played a song for him by the late, great DJ Avicii, and it starts something like this. Wake me up before it's over, when I'm wiser and I'm older. All this time, I was finding myself, and I didn't know I was lost. Thank you.